Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Mary Magnuson. I'm the administrator of the Blandin Community Broadband Program, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Blandin Leadership Roundtable. Bill Coleman is one of our main broadband consultants, and he's going to facilitate this conversation today. Bill?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. And today we've got an expert on broadband economics and data and numbers. Some years ago, Michael Curri of SNG, Strategic Networks Group, helped Blandin Foundation with a study that measured impact of broadband investments in Minnesota and came up with a number that said for every $1 of investment, you get $10 return on investment to the state of Minnesota. And I'm still not quite sure how we came up with that number, but man, did we ever use it. And it became quite popular at the legislature and was really a powerful use of information to sway public opinion. So we're very excited about that, and that was very useful. Michael's also got in strategic network groups as a business technology survey, assessment survey that is, I think, a really interesting tool that has a lot of possibilities for communities to think about. If we can only move businesses up the sophistication scale, how can that improve our local economy? And the work that we've done mostly in northeastern Minnesota with business technology assessments and coaching, I think is a on-the-ground example of that strategy. I used to call that desktop renovation instead of storefront renovation, but now that people are working out of their homes, that's not quite as on target. But today, Michael's going to talk about broadband investment in networks and the concepts that go into developing data that can help you convince different segments of your community about the importance of broadband investment and how that can attract outside investment in your community. So Michael, welcome. Thanks for joining us today, and take it away.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction, Bill and Mary. Happy to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm just gonna turn on sharing of my screen. And can everyone see that?
Yes.
All right. So, Bill asked me to talk about, what information is critical to moving broadband initiatives forward. I'll spend 20-25 minutes on that, and then we can do Q&A. If there's any questions for clarification while I present, happy to, please jump in. And then more substantive questions, we can, do a Q&A at the end. That sound good? All right. So what I'll do is I'll just start off here and put some context around this. I think, well, everyone understands the importance of broadband. However, there's a gridlock with what's been happening over the last, ever since our stimulus has ended. States just didn't have the funding, and we're seeing a lot of need, but not a lot of movement forward to get those networks paid for. One group that we're working with investors in municipal broadband are talking that less than 1% of broadband initiatives that get started actually get built, and that's staggering, and it's a real shame. So the question is, how do we change that? And private service providers, they've got their business case. They where they don't get the returns that they need, they can't serve. So any areas that's unserved, underserved, or overcharged, they have not enough of a business case to make. So we need to find a different way to go about this. And I think that's where this data all comes in. So what I want to do is talk about, first of all, that billions are going to be needed to build out broadband to unserved and underserved areas. Then, excuse me for a second. I'm doing a presentation. You need to leave. This is the beauty of COVID and working from home. So the choice for localities, utilities, and co-ops is that they can either wait for the service providers to come in but unfortunately, they don't have a return in justifying. Just a second. You need to leave. No, you need to leave. Go. Okay, thanks. Bye. Or invest in digital infrastructure and transformation to connect people, communities. I think everyone's seen those kind of moments where someone's doing a presentation or a newscast and then the kids pop in. That's one of those moments, even though you tell them, hey, this is the moment where, we need, 1 hour of no interruptions. Anyway, I'll continue. Sorry about that. The consequence of this, and I think we've all experienced it, and are seeing it across the country, and especially in the rural areas, is the loss of jobs, businesses, population, and GDP, and the lack of broadband and ability to participate. Or, they can be part of that growth in digital assets and local capacity, retaining that base and local sovereignty. So, what's needed is that, know-how, the resources, and the commitment to see how they can get started with broadband and invest in the digital future. That's why we're here. So, the reason for this presentation today, the sort of the goal is to, what is that information that's needed to get those right decisions? And so I'll just give some background about SNG. We've worked across North America, Central America, and Asia, and Europe. In the States, it's been mostly with state governments, local governments, regional governments, helping to understand where is the broadband at, in terms of actual connectivity use and the impacts. We've done impact studies. We've developed a database of over 85,000 records on how individual businesses, organizations, and households are connected, using, and benefiting from their connection. And with that normative database, we've developed some capabilities to draw impacts, as well as some of the things I'll present to you right now. So getting to that information is needed, because that's, in the end, what we're trying to do is make a case for broadband. How do we make that case? What do we need to show the locals so that they buy in? What do we need to show those who are providing funding or financing what they need? And in the end, taking a very pragmatic and economist approach, I'm an economist, is anyone that invests their time, money, or effort need to see the returns based on their terms. What is important to me? What's that? What am I getting out of return for my time, my money, or my effort in this? And so I think the first point, the starting point of this is, who are those key groups? And the key stakeholder groups that that we see, that we've been working with, are the local leaders, and that's a combination, and it varies across communities, but it's any combination of the elected officials, local champions, local anchor institutions, and so forth. The community, it's those local businesses and residents. You have those service providers. There's tier 1 down to tier 5, as some people describe it, and then the investors and government funding agencies. I'm going to pause right there right now. Does anyone else have any stakeholder groups that they think are missing here, or are important? Schools? Yeah, yep. They would be part of the local anchor institutions.
Yeah, but I'd spell them right out. They're big right now.
Oh, I mean, the issue is huge, actually, with this kids not being able to access. In some cases, 70% can't access their online. It's terrible. So in terms of the stakeholder groups, what are the key benefits to them? And I try to break that out into, what is that information that they need for their decision making? So for the local leaders, it's about, jobs, retention, growth, and attraction. Hey, we attracted this many jobs. That all impacts the tax base. It's the local quality of life, the services, amenities, access to healthcare, school, civic services. And in the end, that, factors out into population growth and decline. All those numbers are available, in one form or another. We can develop those too. That's part of what we do in calculating jobs and tracking that. For the community, it's that local economic vitality. And do we have good paying local job opportunities? Also, are we getting, access and affordable, pricing to that broadband that we need? A lot of, areas, the neighborhoods are connected, but other neighborhoods are not. And that's a real challenge. What would our communities look like if, roads were built the same way, with, we'll have some roads here that are, good condition, paved, and now the rest of them are gravel or non-existent. It really limits participation. But also is the local quality of service that they have access to in terms of the broadband and all those, other, civic, health, and education services. For the service providers, obviously, where there are existing service providers and they can be partners in this, great. Or you're trying to attract somebody in, or unless maybe there's competitors to an initiative that's, locally driven, that needs to be addressed. But, the key thing to understand is what is that addressable broadband market? That means, who are those businesses and households that will be served? What kind of services, which also include the current versus potential. And current is what we define as, hey, we're ready to sign up. This is what we're doing right now. But the potential is what they don't know yet. And for small businesses especially, and even households, what are the things they could and should be doing online that could really help them? And in the end, for the service providers, it comes down to a decision on, revenues and whether the capital expenditures and operational expenditures are outweighed by those revenues. If they're not, they can't build. And that's what we call the strict business case. As contrasted to what the SNG we call the economic case, which is like a utility. Roads, water and sewer systems, electrical have indirect benefits to the community that if they, if we didn't have those, a lot of the community benefits would not exist. Finally, in terms of groups, the investors and the funders, what they're looking at primarily is return on investment. In terms of financially, it's the rate and the time period. For the funding agencies, what kind of jobs are we going to get out of this? What kind of impacts to the tax base are we going to see? That's part of the criteria that they look at. We've worked with all those groups. And then there's also what they want to see is the community commitment and partnership, collaboration to ensure project success. I had a meeting, a long and really good meeting with one of the leading financial investors in municipal broadband. And that second bullet, community commitment, partnership, and collaboration is key for them, that they can see that this project will get past the finish line. The numbers may work out, but that's ensured by that commitment and partnership and the collaboration, what they're bringing to the table in these projects. Do you want me to stop there, answer any quick questions at this point, or?
Keep going, Michael.
Okay. So, part of the numbers, I'm going to go through some examples now, what numbers that we've developed to sort of illustrate that, and what stakeholder groups that's relevant to. So, in terms of this is essential infrastructure, and when we look at that, roads were the infrastructure for the industrial economy, and it costs $2 to $10 million to build a mile of road. When you put that in contrast to $100,000 to build a mile of fiber, that's significantly less for the impacts that you're going to have. And I think for those local leaders, for those funding agencies, those are some key numbers that you need to show them. In relatively speaking, we have no problems building roads. How come, we can't, for what would be a budget of 30 miles of road, we could wire this fiber up this entire region or section of the state. So that's important to put that context into place with those kinds of numbers. This is part of some of the research that we've done, and really important for local leaders. Without broadband, communities decline. People leave. Especially those who are working age. We can't connect. We can't do our work. We can't have a livelihood. We can't access services like school or health for our children or for ourselves. And so they're more than definitely or very likely or somewhat likely going to leave. And that when it gets up to 70% or just under 60%, that is a serious risk for the community. And I think COVID has really put a point on all that. It's becoming existential. So, this is, for the communities, the local residents and businesses, they care about this. for, the local leaders and the government agencies. We need this, otherwise we're not going to survive. This gets into some of the work. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Up in Grand Rapids, as if you were going through that previous slide talking about infrastructure, and I think even one slide back. But it just kind of came to me when you were comparing the infrastructure for the digital economy to the roads. Is it time that we take a look at how we present broadband in a different manner? And maybe it doesn't belong where it always has been. Maybe it's time we take a look at that being part of our transportation infrastructure.
Oh, people talk about broadband.
Money being spent at the state on the $2 million to $10 million to build a mile of road, and it seems to me that we're transitioning into the transportation of broadband service. Maybe I don't know. It's just a thought that just came to me.
I fully agree. In terms of with people that say broadband is the fourth utility. We need roads, we need water and sewer, we need electrical. It's now broadband too, and that actually reduces the amount of travel we need to do. For example, COVID right now, people are working from home, not going to office buildings. We don't need those roads to the same extent anymore for traveling to and from work. And I think that's going to continue. So this is critical infrastructure. Those who are not online with a robust and broadband, I'm using the term broadband for anything that's above 100 down, 100 up, 100 symmetric, because the 25.3 FCC definition, that's not future proof, and that's not really robust enough for even running applications like this at points where you get shaky internet. So I fully agree that it should be considered, because it also enables a lot of the other things that need to happen in the local economy and service delivery. So
it just seemed to me like we've got a transportation department, we've got departments for just about everything, and in order to move broadband to the next level, I think we have to get it out of the box where it's like, well, let's fix all this other stuff, and then if we got any money left over, maybe we'll throw some in the broadband. And that needs to become a priority rather than a secondary expenditure. Well,
I fully agree. I think part of the problem has been that everyone's used to building roads. Those are established budgets. Broadband is new. A lot of these elected officials and staff, prior to COVID, sometimes thought, oh, it's nice to have. It's not really need to have. Now everyone is realizing this is existential. So I think reallocation of budgets are needed. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, I started SNG back in '98. Even then people knew broadband was good, but the question I had as an economist, as I said before, is, well, if broadband is so good and everyone realizes it, how come more isn't being invested in this? Well, how can we, take away, money from road budgets or, whatever else, and at a local, regional, or state level or federal level, if we can't show the benefits of what this broadband means? And so, I started SNG to quantify, first of all, what are those benefits from broadband to a community, to a region, to individual businesses and households, to help make that case, to say, what, here are all these benefits and they enable all these other activities. Now let's start, seriously, rethinking how we're budgeting, on these capital expenditures.
So here in Minnesota, we have counties are able to levy a wheelage tax for every automobile that's licensed in their county.
Right.
Pays about $10 or something. And that adds up to a lot of money that has provided a lot of road improvements across Minnesota. And most, $10, who's going to feel that, right? When you're already paying for your license tabs or your things. And so, a few nickels add up across into quite a bit of money and provide good financing. So that would be an option somehow.
Yeah, or a cross subsidy on that. Yeah, I fully agree.
This is Barbara from Leesure. I just wanted to add that a part of this is taking it away from the telephone maps. We have border to border grant in our county for a whole township of 12 houses that are CenturyLink. That is just absurd. It is just absurd that the telephone maps are still a big part of the equation and a barrier to expanding.
Yeah. Well, that's I think that's a whole other discussion that we can have on how to address that. That's an issue. Where was I? Sorry about the location. Yes, utilization. And I think this is another set of numbers as an example that we developed. Based on the research, we were asked often to come in and say, hey, we invested all this money in broadband. What's been the impact, to that community or to that region? Whether it's local money or federal money or state money that was invested. As we did the research, we found, as we looked at, not only how they were connected, but what they were doing with that connection. What was interesting is that those who were at a higher level of utilization, a digital maturity or sophistication, as Bill Coleman mentioned, they were earning more revenues online, which is, makes sense. But what was really, and so I'll get to the next point, but we measure that on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. And so you can see here in this chart that, you have, for some businesses, 52% of businesses, sorry, for the scale, for the 9 to 10 utilization scores, they're earning 52% of the revenues online. And so those who aren't online, as more and more people go onto the web to search for this product or service, well, they're going to eat up market share. And so if not only are you not competitive, you're not relevant in an online economy if you're not doing, you don't have a web page and using social media and so forth, and those things. And so it's more than just having that infrastructure in place. It's also having that ability to use it effectively, what we call digital transformation. And why is that important? Well, and we broke that out into these numbers. The payoff is significant. Where those with a low digital economy index, that scale of 1 to 10, so below 7 are the gold bars there. And those with a high score of 10 are almost more than double the revenues of businesses that are effectively using it. And so, as Bill said, this raising sophistication, that doing that desktop renovation, as he said, is critical to helping those businesses and even households understand. Now you've got this, 4-lane highway to your front door, to use that metaphor. Now we're going to teach you how to drive and give you a map on where you're going to go. That's important because otherwise you're going to have underutilization. 50% of businesses in our research and 56% of households are not taking full advantage of their internet connection. They're underutilizing it. That's an opportunity cost in local economic development as well as quality of life. And it's also off balance sheet to those private sector service providers. Whether that business, now stays or goes for the tier 1 companies, that's a $100, $150 connection. But because they've grown and they've added 6 more employees, that really doesn't show up on that internet connection bill. But for the community, especially in the rural area, those are 6 new jobs, maybe 6 more families, and a whole bunch of local spending potentially. So that's part of those indirect benefits that make this a utility, just like roads, like water and sewer, like electrical systems. I'll pause there. Does that make sense?
This is Becky Laurie. I don't quite understand this slide. I need a little more help with it. Like on the 500 plus, can you give me an example of, just give me a little more detail on that slide.
Okay. So the gold bars are those businesses that are underutilizing their connection. They don't have a web page. They're not using social media. Okay. Maybe they're doing email, but they're not being found, on Google Maps and so forth for their business. And so the jobs that are being created, new jobs, for them, and the under 20 employees, they're seeing 21% or almost 22% in terms of jobs that are being new jobs are being created. However, those businesses who are online,
the number of employees. Okay.
Yeah, new jobs
got
created.
it.
I should have clarified that from the beginning, because new jobs.
Well, else got it. I have a small. I'm watching this on my iPhone, so I can't always read. Anyway,
yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
So this is a huge impact to the local economy for those businesses that are online. This is important again to those stakeholder groups. We're back, local leaders. We want to do this. We need to do this so we can have good paying local jobs. Jobs there's always growth and decline in any economy. Well, we've got to replace those jobs that are going away. Our research shows that those businesses who are online are twice and more than twice as likely in creating new jobs. For the community, for the businesses, they need to understand this as well. You're going to grow from this. And so also for the government agencies, especially when you talk about things like an EDA grant, yes, we'll give you those $2 million, but you got to show the job impacts. Well, we can actually we can forecast them up front, and we can track them, once the project is built. I mean, I think that's part of the data that needs to be, developed around these projects, because it's not just infrastructure, it's how you use it. The analogy I use is, we could spend, millions of dollars on building a new high school. Great new facilities, all the latest, all that. How useful is that school if we don't have any teachers in that school? We don't budget for any kind of teaching. Not the same, but we do that with our broadband networks. And that's a real detriment to the communities, because those business practices and the technology are evolving. And, for those established local businesses, you want to make sure that they are competitive and relevant in an online economy. So again, the value of digital infrastructure comes from how it's used. And that's what we call digital transformation. So just because you're available doesn't mean people connect. And just because people connect doesn't mean people use it. And that's what we define as utilization. And it's actually that utilization that increases the value of the network. And you can actually change the pro forma of a of a service provider's business case by growing that demand, by focusing on utilization, because then more people will understand, what I use. I'm going to connect, and I'm not going to buy the base package. I'm going to connect to those higher. I know what a 500 meg or a gig connection is worth to me. I'll pay for that difference happily. So I'm going to be wrapping up here shortly, but one of the things that we want to sort of share is, to understand what decisions need to be made, you need to have a framework to measure and capture that right type of data and information to influence those people that we identified with those key things. I gave you some examples. This is the framework that we use, that we've developed around broadband. So I'll just pause there. I think someone had a question. Okay. So it's important to start with the end in mind, so to speak. What outcomes are you trying to realize with those decision makers? What are those data points and information items and indicators that will influence them? And then work backwards to understand, how you're going to capture those and measure those, so you can help them make better decisions. And that's what we've specialized in, for the last 20 years, and built a lot of tools around that. An example of that is, we worked with a municipal broadband network, provide gigabit service. We actually showed them that by, growing demand, by showing what was possible, they actually could increase their ARPU, their average revenue per user, by 88% and increase the customers by 13.5%. That's significant, So that part of market assessment, understanding those users is critical, not just for, whether it's a local municipally owned or co-op or private sector, tier 1, tier 3, whatever, all this is relevant to those service providers, and helping, working with them in that process is critical. So, and that's part of what this last slide is about. It's really about weighing in with the right information to tip the scales on network investment. Typically it's just, does the do the revenues outweigh the capex and opex? Well, let's move on from that and look at this as digital infrastructure, and look at this. If we have the network cost, but also community engagement, showing them what is possible. Engaging with the community about everyone needs to be online here because that's where the economy is going. Well, we can then also measure, and that is outweighed by those municipal cost reductions in service delivery and access and just maintenance and so forth. Those subscriber cost savings that they're realizing. We've done actually some studies on that that are actually on our website you can look into. Local economic growth, we're doing this for our local economy and showing some of those numbers. And then also, smart community services. There's been a lot of talk about smart community. I don't think there's been as much progress on there as there should be. Part of the problem is because we haven't really, it's been sort of these siloed or these one-offs rather than a sort of an integrated approach to, using technology as a way to solve those goals and issues that the community has already identified, and then finding out, how the technology and this platform can help solve it. In the end, you need to, assess that case for investing in that digital infrastructure. And I think, that, when you give those right stakeholder groups the information that they need in this sort of context, they can then make, better informed decisions on that. So with that, I'll pause and we can start some Q&A.
Thanks, Michael. That was great.
So I have a really fun report to make, and it intersected with so many of Michael's points, especially benefits for key stakeholders. I just got a notice yesterday. We've been working with Scott Savage, with SCI for a long time, but it was just too expensive. It's too hard to get underneath the rail, get permission from the railroad to go under the railroad tracks to come to Nemadji. He now has that permission. And so SCI is going to provide us with a redundant high-speed connection, and they're going to start installing pretty soon. But what's so cool is that now that SCI has us, a large customer, while they're running the line, the fiber line to Nemadji, they're also going to wire the whole town of Bruno so they can provide internet to the Bruno residents. So it's not only going to benefit us now that they got permission to get under the railroad tracks, it's going to benefit the whole city of Bruno. Isn't that exciting news?
Congratulations, Becky. That is exciting. For people who don't know, Becky runs a medical records information company up in far northern Pine County, out in the bush on old scenic Highway 23, and has been working for a decade trying to get better broadband service, getting across that railroad track. That shows where a little policy is important, because I think 2 years ago, the legislature actually changed the law around railroads being able to control, charge exorbitant fees and take 3 years to approve permits to go underneath. And so they standardized those fees and shorten the process. And here's the result. So congratulations, Becky.
Thanks.
I bet your bankers happy and your customers.
I just got the word yesterday. I'm sure that, I'm sure they're going to be happy. It's really, and it's great news for the whole little city of Bruno.
Well, you get to be riding the parade then this year, I bet.
If I weren't self-isolating.
Good. Thank you for that. as people are working with their providers or working with community leaders, what kind of data would be, you know, what are we missing? Are there data sets that we could create at a state or regional level that would be helpful?
If I could just weigh in for a minute here, I'm curious about the idea of local jobs and local economy, and so Michael, I'm curious. I'd like to hear from you about how you're going to model this great disruption, right? So, yes, it's true that if we have broadband in rural areas, people would be more inclined to move there. You know, you've got your chart showing the differences by age groups. And people may begin to move away from dense urban centers, particularly in a contagious virus situation. But then on the other hand, if you transition your businesses to online platforms and they figure out how to do digital retail, the people whose jobs might be created could be living anywhere in the world. They could be living in Marseille, as you are. So how do the old models of projecting job growth and economic benefit get jarred by the pandemic? And particularly since I would predict, and with my crystal ball, this is not the last pandemic we're going to have to deal with. So will those models change, and how are you going to assess that?
Well, we actually have developed our own models based on the data that we collected. So, you know, there are, you know, traditional input-output models that you use, which model the economy. We use that to show the impacts throughout, but our primary sources, we collect data, as I said, you know, directly from individual businesses and organizations and households. So we understand from that business how many employees that they had over the last 12 months. How has that changed? You know, have they hired or lost anybody? And, you know, of those jobs that were, you know, created or lost, which ones were attributable to broadband? What's really interesting, and the data that I can show on this, is that across all sectors, the jobs, there were job declines, of course, in any community and so forth. But the net impacts, the net effect of job creation was always positive because of broadband. Now, the question becomes, you know, rural area, you know, now they're online, you know, I can buy from Amazon. I can buy from all these other retailers instead of the local store. Well, that's happening anyway. So, you know, if you're a retailer, you know, maybe that's time to shift your focus. Maybe it's retail is not the way, or you specialize, but you're not going to be able to lock in your market, your local market, to your services anymore. Anyone can provide those services. So it's a give and take in the end. You know, you got to specialize, knowing that the online economy is changing how we do business, for better or for worse, but also that not only can other outside, you know, businesses, you know, address your market locally, but you in your local area can, you know, address markets worldwide. Tracking all of that, well, that's part of what we're doing. Really interesting question. But what we've done is we've said, as I described before, we've tracked actual impacts in job creation and losses, you know, for communities and regions and across. We've done 10 statewide broadband assessments. We then take that data and we, you know, when we do a sort of an ex-ante analysis, you know, upfront desktop exercise, we look at that community or that region or that state. We say, okay, here's what we see as the local economic infrastructure, businesses and makeup. We then extrapolate from our data onto that to say, these are the types of jobs we expect, you know, for this many, you know, businesses in professional technical services and manufacturing and so forth. That's a first pass. We would much prefer to actually collect data from actual businesses and have them tell us what's been happening with their job creation and so forth, and then track it. So that gets to a question I think that Bill raised 5 minutes ago, which is, what can the state do? Facilitate that measurement. You know, do, you know, a regional or a statewide assessment, because if a community does that on their own, there's a certain cost to that. Data collection is expensive. We do it really cost effectively, but it is still, but doing it at a community versus state level, it's not tenfold the cost. It's actually very marginal. So that's something that the state could facilitate and measure, and then share with the local communities for their economic development, as well as providers. Hey, providers, there's some markets, some addressable markets that flew under your radar. And so that, I think there's a huge return for if state dollars are paid to collect that data and made, obviously protecting privacy of the individuals, but aggregating in the way to show here are the new opportunities for economic development for addressable broadband service markets. So does that answer your question?
It does to a certain extent. I mean, I was trying to, I don't know the answer to this. How tightly connected is job creation with relocating for a job? So you said earlier in your presentation, well, if you create 6 jobs, that maybe that's 6 families who moved to your town. Well, maybe it's 0 families who moved to your town. Maybe they stay in St. Paul, Minnesota. So I worry,
I break that out further.
Yeah.
So so when we asked about job creation, it's about, these are new jobs that were created because of their online activities. So they had some business growth. They've hired new, fulfillment people, more sales people, more production people, and so forth. There are also relocating of households. Those are personal preferences, where they want to live. Tracking people who move between jobs, that we didn't track that. We are tracking those new jobs that were created because of broadband.
I think Anna's point is interesting. As jobs used to be tied to location, but now a job could be created by a company in rural Minnesota, but filled by somebody in metro Minnesota just as easily now as jobs created in the metro can be filled by people in greater Minnesota. So it's an interesting question about jobs and community vitality, because the jobs aren't necessarily where the company is anymore. And so I think that's a really interesting point, Anna. I'm not sure how you measure that, but I think you would measure it in things like home values of, and how quickly homes sell in an area, and population growth, and that go along with economic growth.
We actually track that, Bill. I mean, we did a project for Custer County, Colorado a couple years back. And Custer County is about 2.5 hours southwest of Denver, the foothills of the Rockies. People moved there because of the amenities. What was really interesting was that, the second, biggest demographic group was teleworkers. People moved to that area because they wanted to be there for the amenities, and they were working at a distance. We tracked those people working telework, inside the county versus outside the county, actually time to commute to work and how many days per week that they're teleworking. So we are getting a good picture of that as well. So yeah, to your point, Bill and Anna, what they call it, location neutral job creation. And I think, communities need to now look at, it's not just, the investment in those community services, having all those amenities in the community will actually attract people who are location neutral, that have a good connection, and say, you know what, I want to live here because this is a great little community, or a great, with all these services that I look forward to. That needs to be part of the calculus, where before it was just strictly how much we're going to get paid. It was more limiting.
Michael said, have you seen any data about about preferences for people choosing where to live, assuming that broadband is a requirement? What are do you know of other things that are high on the list of relocation? Certainly hospitals and schools would be up there. I think in Fergus Falls, where Anna is, they've really put the bet on the arts as a relocation driver.
We actually track when we do our assessment. It's something we added over the last a couple of years. Are basically community goals and satisfaction with the community, and they were actually linked to the UN's International Development Goals that were adopted by 193 countries in 2015. But it's essentially there's 15 that we see as being linked to broadband, and it's economic development, access to health and schooling, job opportunities, and then some of those more basic things like access to clean water and so forth. Most of the people's response has been, we want broadband. It's always close to number one, if not number one. Job opportunities, local economic vitality, and so forth. It's a personal decision. Myself, I can live anywhere as long as I've got a broadband connection and an airport nearby. It's really, I choose those communities that have those amenities that I'm looking for. And I think the key criteria, Bill, is if you don't have broadband, you're out of the running. And this just becomes another, you have site selection criteria for businesses. Well, this becomes site selection criteria for professionals or people who can telework. I think it really opens up the doors for communities that have decent connection, have low land and housing costs, and established infrastructure and services, but have seen a decline over the last years. This actually can reinvigorate them, by attracting the right type of people.
Michael, so make the argument that we can help the provider's pro forma improve by spurring broadband sophistication, more use. So how do you quantify that?
Well, for businesses, we measure 17 online practices that go across all industry sectors. For households, we track 30, and we've been doing that for the last 15 years. We've also evolved that. And so that's how this score here, the Digital Economy Index, that we can measure this kind of thing. So each individual business and households, they identify, yes, we're banking online, we're doing document transfer. I mean, this is standard at this point. But having a website, using social media, using peer networking and so forth. By doing those things, they're more relevant. The challenge is, though, and we found this in some of the markets where we worked, that was at 30 to 40% of those subscribers were buying the base package. And that makes it really tough for the business case for the provider. They're buying the base package because they're saying, why should I pay 20 to 30 bucks more a month for more bandwidth? Because they don't know what they don't know and what they can do with it. And so by doing what we have developed are these Digital Economy Index scorecards that we use to say, hey, take this assessment. We then give that aggregate report back to that community or region or to the state to say, here's where the broadband is, here's its use, here's the impacts it's having, here are the opportunities. But then we can give it back to that individual business or household to say, hey, look, here are the things that you're not doing. Here's what the new revenues or cost savings that you're missing out on, and you are a score of what 6.2 out of 10. When your peers on average are 7.5, for example. And if 85% of your peers are doing more online than you, you're in trouble in the new economy. So that's really a way to personalize this. Oh, it's nice to be online. Now, no, we've actually made it real. We've personalized the ROI of this to that individual business, and that's why we get to this kind of market assessment where we can show that network provider, you can increase the average revenues per user by 88% in this particular market that we work with, and increase the customer base, by growing that demand by personalizing it in this way. we call those the Digital Economy Index scorecards, which you know of, Bill. They're actually on our website. I can point to people if they're interested, but to us, that's a key way to showing people what's possible, and not just let them dismiss it as, oh, that's nice to have, or it's not for me. No, 85% of your peers are doing this. If you're not doing this, you're not only missing out on revenues, but you're not being found online.
Thanks for that. Other questions or comments? Hey, Bud, as you're a chamber director, and some of your area has great broadband and some of it doesn't have such good broadband. Do you see a difference in the way businesses act and how profitable they are based on their broadband connectivity?
I don't know. I don't have the economics in my back pocket on that, Bill, but I would say that those people that have been able to utilize the broadband in their businesses are certainly going to have a better opportunity to increase their effectiveness, rather than somebody that hasn't. Back to what Michael was talking about the reasons people move to a community, what we found out is that attracting new talent is critical for us in northeastern Minnesota. We know that we have to find 50,000 people in the northeast part of the state in the next 5 years just to replace jobs that are now being held by people that aren't going to be working anymore. And the two questions that are asked primarily are, who's going to educate my children and who's going to fix me when I'm broken? It's healthcare and education are the two big ones. Broadband usually doesn't come into the original conversation until the decision has been made to move. And then they start to look for a place to live, and then broadband becomes the priority. If this house doesn't have access, then I'm not interested in even looking at it, But primarily it's the culture that they look at first, but broadband becomes the deciding factor is where they locate within our community.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really interesting, but our business community has embraced broadband. Those people that have invested and educated themselves as to how to use it are definitely profiting from that. I think the pandemic has shown us that one of our shortcomings here is in our school system. Our schools did a phenomenal job with what they had to work with. I'm just thinking how better of a job we could have done if we'd had more tools, if we had a bigger toolbox to work from. And so when I sit on these meetings, I look at today, but I also forecast for the future, like Anna said, this is probably not the last time this is going to happen. And I think we need to be a little bit better prepared for that. I still go back to the infrastructure piece. I think it's time that we spent a little more effort trying to convince the state of Minnesota that broadband is a priority item for the whole state. Doing it county by county, city by county, that's great, but you don't get the horsepower that you do is if you can figure out a way to engage the state legislature in a priority item and transportation of information, I think is where it rings home to me. So that's kind of my take on it.
Good. Thanks so much. Any other closing comments from anyone? Michael?
I'd just like to add to something that Bud said, and it just hit home as I was listening to your comments. In the past, in some communities, and maybe it still happens, I saw what was sort of a race to the bottom. We want to have the lowest local taxes. We want to have the lowest, land costs. We want to have the lowest, or give it away for free, the land with the utilities and so forth, to attract, businesses locating. That actually has consequences, which are, well, we don't then have the budgets to get, the right education and emergency services and health services in place and community services. And I think, I've seen some of those communities. I'm not going to name them, and it's really sad to see, these ratepayers saying we want to pay the minimum amount of taxes. Well, that's like saying, you know, I don't want to fix my roof. There may be a leak, but I want to pay the minimum amount on, you know, the roof. I think with this location neutral, you know, working opportunities and business opportunities, that's reversed the whole thing. I choose, and I remember standing in, well, this is a bit exotic, I guess, but I remember my wife had a meeting in Lyon, France. And, you know, coming from North America, you see all this infrastructure, and they're building, you know, swimming pools and stadiums along the banks of the Rhone River. I'm thinking, that's a lot of tax money that's being invested in this. You know, these people are paying a lot of taxes. You know, who'd want to live here? And then I sort of looked at this and I realized, you know, I'd want to live here. This is gorgeous. You know, this is a great quality of life. And I think that, you know, the communities that realize that we can attract people now who are high income earners. We can attract businesses that can be, you know, working from anywhere because we've got broadband, but we're going to attract them because we have, you know, great outdoor facilities. I love the outdoors. You know, we have great community service, great schools. I look for schools. That's the first thing, well, my wife looks at. And so, you know, the things that Bud mentioned actually reverses that trend of that race to the bottom. It's actually who invests the most wisely in the right amount of, you know, community infrastructure and services that people say, you know what, this is a great place for me to raise my family, or for me to run my business, or for me just to live, you know, with the friends and the culture that I'm looking for. So just to, you know, sort of really accentuate by what you'd mentioned.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining, and continue to send me contact or ideas for topics. These are meant to be good discussions like we had today. Congratulations to Becky on your new internet. It'll be so exciting for you to not be on your iPhone. Be able to use a big old 27-inch screen. So that will be fun. Mary, you want to close
Of
this
course,
out?
remember, it's not, I'm working from home. So this is going to Nemadji, the site in Bruno. So I still won't have great internet here on the farm. So
well, hopefully the pandemic will be over soon.
and I'll be back in the, yeah.
Maybe it'll
Well,
get
thank you for today. It was very, very
Well, thanks everyone for attending. We will have this recording posted to our Blandin on Broadband blog with a little recap, probably a little bit later today. And we'll also share Michael's slides. So thank you, Michael, for attending. And thanks everyone for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks everyone.
And Mike, I love the